people are still on break. So here we are, though, with a rather short chapter today. Um, Stephen is on the road today. We knew that going forward. I'm pretty sure did we send out a list of the coming dates?
I didn't get one.
No.
We meant to. So we will. I don't know if you can hear this, Madalena, but I sent you an email about it about an hour ago as well. So we will send out a list of the coming dates. Yeah, okay. So it hasn't been sent yet. It will be sent. And most of the time we'll be doing it together, but it's just a choppy time between holidays and travel and things like that. My trip it was a really good trip, a very intense trip. Not necessarily every day intense, because I'm learning at my age of 66 to take it a little bit easier than I used to on the road. But besides being in Israel for a week with the grandchildren and our daughters and my my good friends and former students and colleagues, talking, the presence of being in Israel was, of course, nothing like it's been in the past. I was expecting that. And the only thing to do is to be there. I mean, for me, it's just to be and not to talk so much. I was fortunate to lead services together with one of my students, with Ariel Polak, who was connected in two ways to this trip. One, because I did Kabbalat Shabbat with him and is very successful with lots of young people, congregation downtown Tel Aviv, but also because I know him from when he was about 18, 17 or 18, as a young, unofficial prayer leader of this group that I was invited to help work with in 2008 or so in Budapest, Hungary. And 2 weeks later, that is this last Shabbat, I was at that congregation with them, leading prayers for them and teaching them. So I'm sure I'll go over some of these stories again, but very gratifying to see things that I was involved in 15 years ago really coming to fruition, and with yeah, lots of young people. And then the Shabbat in between Tel Aviv and Budapest, where I was at Taizé, which some many of you know of, and it was the changing of the guard, the transition from one prior to the next. Brother Alois, who's been there who's been the prior for 18 years, 16, 18 years, who is Roman Catholic, has been succeeded by Brother Matthew, who is Anglican. And so there were two bishops from the Church of Sweden that were there, both female bishops, which was, I think, probably the first time that there had been such prominence of women clergy at Taizé. After all, it's a community of brothers. It was it was very touching to be there for that, and have been invited and asked to speak on a few occasions as well. So on one hand, whirlwind, on the other hand, the days in between, I was able to take it relatively easy and meet with students at a new rabbinical school, relatively new rabbinical school in Paris, that was founded by two friends of mine, Rabbi Tom Cohn and Rabbi Pauline Bebe. And Pauline is actually quite well known to those that read French. She's written a number of books. They're married. They've been married since the early 90s, and they met in rabbinical school in Israel. That's also when the band Les Rocking Rabbis started, which used to be called something else. But that's the reason that every once in a while, every few years, I disappear to Paris to play in a rock band, not blues, but rock band. And I met some of their students, really interesting people, usually not young students, usually second career. And so it's great to see these wonderful communities, progressive liberal communities, thriving in parts of Europe where Americans and Israelis, love to think that it's overburdened with anti-Semitism, whether it is France or whether it is Hungary. When you're there on the ground, it looks very, very different, and that's gratifying. Everywhere I go, I talk about this group and the other two groups that we've been, or the other group right now of interfaith study. It still seems to be rather unique that this kind of for this length of time and this kind of depth and intensity of study. So we should all be very proud of this. Yeah, and I met at least one person, an Episcopal priest who works a lot in interfaith in New York, upstate New York, that perhaps there'll be some new development with him as well. Okay, our text today is in the chat box if you don't have it.
I have it.
It is Hanukkah. We're going to light the 8th candle tonight for those of you who are in Palm Springs. I know there's not that many here, but we'll be lighting at Gray Coffee House, which has become our custom in the last few years. And we slowly have been bringing in more and more light, according to the house, the school of Hillel, as opposed to the school of Shammai, which stated that one should light 8 candles and then go down to 1 on the last day. We go according to Hillel, and we add that light, and we hope that that light will symbolically shed some light in the dark places around the world, whether it is in the hearts of those who have been held hostages or still are being held as hostage, or there's families amongst the Israelis, those that lost their loved ones, experienced the trauma and the rape and the destruction of the evil of Hamas, and also the dark places of those who are left without any home in the Gaza Strip, and to no choice of their own, are in deep, deep suffering and darkness, especially wondering about what will happen going forward. So with that, we dedicate our study to the memory of those that have been lost and to the good health of those that are still alive. The title that I gave here, I have to say I was influenced by something. I've been rewatching a program on TV. Maybe I won't mention what the name of it, lest I be embarrassed, but one of the characters has chosen the pronouns they and them. And it's interesting to see who is able to use those pronouns easily and who is not. And of course, the scene from what I was watching before I prepared this of a father who meets up with his child and continues to call her, even though she wants to be referred to as them. It's perhaps less of an issue in the circles that many of you travel in amongst younger people. You may know that on Zoom you're expected to put your pronouns on the title next to your name. Yeah, and it's part of a lot, a larger picture of what is derogatorily called wokeism, or what is known to be hyper politically correct, and in other circles known to be just basic decency and sensitivity. And so I was influenced by my preparation of this week's chapter because of the use of I. So I kind of write I, me, and mine, even though usually it's his, her, his, he, him, and his. This is I, me, and mine. And because of the emphasis that we're going to see that the narrator or the writer here puts on God speaking in the first person. We've had God speaking in the first person before. That's not new. But this seems to be a little bit emphasized here on steroids. Afterwards, after I did some more preparation this morning, I would have called this something. I would have stolen a title of a chapter in a commentary from over 100 years ago. Well, I think I'm going to say Adam Smith, although it could be maybe I'm confusing it with the other Adam Smith. It's either Adam Gray or Adam Smith, but in the ICC commentary series, which were from the beginning of the 19th century, some of them even for the end of the beginning of the 20th century, some from even the end of the 19th century. Anyway, this chapter heading here is bearing or born. Bearing or born. So let's keep that in mind as we go forward with the text, bearing or born. Or if you like mine better, I, me, and mine. And let's see where we're taken. We're still kind of in the middle of this tirade against the foreign gods, as we're going to see from the first sentence already. And I don't know if Steve was here. One of the questions I would ask him is, what are the Christological connections in this particular chapter? I didn't see any that are apparent, which of course means nothing or means very little. But so we'll have to ask him next time when we're together, which I think will be next week. But as I say, we'll be sending out a list. Okay. So Steve, you want to read for us 1 and 2?
Sure, I can do that. Okay. Bell is bowed, Nebo is cowering. Their images are a burden for beasts and cattle. The things that you carry in procession, yeah, and are now piled as a burden, or tired beasts. They're coward, they bowed as well. They could not rescue the burden, and they themselves went into captivity.
Hmm. So the subject here being,
Yeah, they're running down the other gods, the false gods.
right. So Bel, some of you know from if you just had a biblical education, you know from the book of Daniel. But Bel is another name for Marduk, the chief Babylonian god. And I don't know much about Nevo. But they're both are what's meant to be say here is they're personified here. It's anthropomorphism of the idols, right? They're bowed, they're cowering. Of course, if they're idols, they can neither bow nor cower, but perhaps that's the brilliance of the description here. And their images, right? They are being schlepped away. What comes to mind to me immediately here is the carting away of the things from the temple after the destruction of the second temple in the first century, and these depictions you have in some places, and I don't know if we have for the first temple as well, but this idea that things are being schlepped off, being carted away in defeat. The things that were supposed to help but could not help, those, of course, are not idols. Here are idols. And then we see, I'm sorry, I forgot. I'm a little bit out of practice. I haven't taught for a few weeks now, so I should have asked first. What are the other impressions that people get here?
It's kind of blunt
Yeah.
and
Oh.
it's not joyful at all.
Mhm. Well, yeah, he's turning towards. I mean, on one hand, the narrator has God. This is still God speaking. Has God speaking to the Israelites, as we're going to see in the next paragraph, but describing the defeat of the others. And there's nothing gentle about it. You're right. It's very harsh. But if look at the different words in this paragraph that are personification of the idols themselves. Right? They're bowed, they're cowering, um, coward and bowed. There's a little chiastic kind of a thing there. Um, and they themselves went into captivity, right? All the things that they're supposed to do, they're supposed to be giving strength to those who worship them. And they're supposed to carry and prop up those who worship them and give them power, yet they themselves becomes the object of need.
Isn't it they themselves went into captivity referring to the animals?
Yeah, that's it could go both ways, and I think I think it has to do with I think more it's probably it probably makes more sense to understand the idols themselves, the gods, the little g gods went into captivity.
Yeah, but along with the animals, it's the way I read that
Yes.
the idols were on the backs of some animals, and the
Right.
animals themselves also were coward and bowed and went into captivity along with the idols they were carrying.
Right. So yeah, if we see it that way, then the whole picture one gets is a very depressing picture of trudging along, everybody stooped over.
Yeah, and they abused animals. The animals, they're innocent, and
Yeah.
they're getting sucked up into this horrible depressive,
Right. So well, I'm not sure that would be in the mind of the writer from 2,500 years ago. I could definitely see that would be a way to talk about that now as well. The implications, the repercussions of how people act and how people believe on the animal population. Yeah.
Why would you say that? You mean you say that 2,500 years ago people didn't care about their animals? I should
I
think
don't
they
think
would.
that was I don't think that was the concern. It's first of all, it's not their animals, it's the other person's animals. I don't know that there was such compassion for animal life.
But they
There,
were closer. I don't know. They were closer to they were their own animals. they were close to, they lived with them, they were amongst them. And I would think that they would be concerned because they're also very valuable.
Uh-huh.
And in that kind of agrarian economy,
Okay.
they're more valuable than animals are to us nowadays,
Yeah, okay, I'll
financially.
go with that. And there are the laws that warn against allowing the animal of a neighbor to be overburdened. So it's not just your own animal, it's other animals as well. Yeah, and there's laws about, not killing a mother and its child at the same time in sight of each other. Okay.
Hmm.
Okay. But this would be a text to quote for those that do want to talk about Torah, the Torah of animal rights and text to use. This would be one that I think that would use. There's another one that we had last year in some context, or the last 2 years. I remember a chapter in Job. Something tells me we did it even in this group, maybe connected with something in Acts. I don't know, but there's a chapter in Job, which is just a catalog of animals and what they do and characteristics of animals.
Hmm.
Towards the latter part of Job, I think. Don't remember the chapter. Okay, but we see the theme of burden, right, being carried. So the gods, the little g gods, are not carrying the people, are not bearing the people, but they're being borne themselves. Hence, so this is going to bother me. Let me just look it up, see what his name is. Notes. I'm sorry, George Adam Smith. Okay, I knew I wanted to get that. Adam Smith, but it wasn't Adam, it's George Adam Smith. Commentary on Isaiah from beginning of the 20th century, and he's the one that gave that title, "Bearing or Born," which I wish I had given that title to this page. So here, the ones that should have been bearing, they're the ones who were born themselves. Okay, BORNE. All right, anything else on this paragraph?
It conveys to me they lost whatever they had, they lost. Whatever powers they
They
had,
being
they being the idols.
the idols, the gods, right? Right. I don't think that the author thought that they had actually thought at some point they had power, but now he's got his proof, right? You see all the things. Yeah. Okay. Um, Stephen Byrne, you want to read 3 to 4?
Listen to me, O house of Jacob, all that are left of the house of Israel, who has been carried since birth, deported since leaving the womb. Till you grow old, I will still be the same. When you turn gray, it is I who will carry. I was the maker, and I will be the bearer, and I will carry and rescue you.
Okay. Reactions.
It's quite a transition.
This is them,
And
this is me. Yeah.
yeah,
Go ahead.
and I was struck by all the things that follow the I. I will be the same. He's unchanging. As you're old, I'll carry you. When you're gray, I think there's a reminder in there that he's the maker. I was the maker and the bearer. And then I thought it was interesting at the end where he says, I will carry and then rescue. How that word rescue comes in, like, I'm there for you. So,
Yeah, the word for rescue in Hebrew here is not the word, the same word that had come up a lot in these chapters, which is Yesha, the basis of Yeshua's name, Hoshana, that same root of salvation. Here it's Va'amalet. Amalet milut. Nimlat has to do with escape usually. And I will be the one, if you wanted to parse it out, it's not poetic, but I will be the one to allow you to escape. Maybe there's other usage, early usages that do not include, but later Hebrew certainly uses escape as part of it. Nobody, yes, nobody, you could say nobody will be rescued is the same as nobody will escape. Yeah. And then so this is a little lesson in theology, right? And we talk about the nature of God. Did God create the world? Let's say God, those in the ancient world, and maybe even today, they said, yes, God created the world, but God is hands off, right? Those that have taught theology and philosophy in their lives know the different versions of how God has been seen. And here, not only is God was the maker, God is also the bearer. A different way in biblical thought is that's gone into Judaism is that God continues the creation perpetually. Creation is happening perpetually. And so here's been broken down into two things but the reason it's been broken down here is because, and this is irony or perhaps sarcasm, right? I'm the maker. The other guys, Bel and Nebo, they were made. And we had chapters that talked about, right? The iron and the stone and everything like that. They were made. I'm the maker, dude. I'm the one who makes the stuff. And then and they're being born now on the show, unschlepped by these animals who are stooped over, who unfairly are going into captivity, as Richard pointed out. I'm the one who bears. So that gives a balance. I'm the exact opposite of what all these folks who were so powerful, these Babylonians, who they thought they were riding sky high because of their gods. At least that's how it's presented here. And the motif here of from birth to womb, from birth and womb to being gray. We once had a little competition, a bunch of us when I was in university, thinking of different from womb to tomb, from sperm to worm. We even had one which is perhaps a little bit disrespectful, but was from erection to resurrection. Sorry for that. From seed to weed. Yeah, there are a lot of these, but that's kind of that's really the message here. I, says God, and uses I a lot. I do this, I do that, but I am the maker, I am the bearer. I cover humanity from birth to death. What's not said here, perhaps needs to be pointed out, there is nothing here about afterlife, right? Not surprising, I think, from a Hebrew Bible point of view, but perhaps from a Christian point of view. There's nothing I see here, at least. I'm sure somebody has used over the centuries has used a text here and there to talk about the afterlife, unless somebody sees something that I don't see.
That brings an interesting question about the parallelism between verses in the Hebrew Bible and the Christian Bible. Yeah, they're different stories, perhaps, but they are unfolding. And in that unfolding, there is at least some element of faithful credence to the Christian scriptures. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, it certainly makes sense from a Christian point of view, looking at things as
No, that's why I'm saying that from a Christian point of view. The idea about nothing being said about the afterlife really could be an element of a progression of God's activity within human life and afterlife. Then,
yeah. But we have another group which, unfortunately or fortunately, for the dynamic of the group, it's fortunate, but it's unfortunate for those of you that don't live in Palm Springs. We have another group that we're taking a break now, but meets Thursdays afternoons, which we take a look at different texts that are it's roughly based on a book by Amy Jill Levin and Mark Brettler called the Bible with and Without Jesus. And the Bible referred to as the Hebrew Bible, and we're going through different texts from the Hebrew Bible that are central to Christian thought, and yet we see them very differently when we see them in the Jewish context itself, the pre-Christian context. None of this is to say this is right and this is wrong. God forbid, that's not the point. All this is to say, let's take a look at these things from the different viewpoints. In the same way,
It's just a literary device that attracts thought and expression.
okay, good. All right. So anything else on this particular issue or this paragraph?
David, during this time, is this when, like, Bell and Nebo, they're kind of falling. It's like a transition of power of who's the dominant power. Because I think I listened to the one that I missed last, but there was talk of like Cyrus is coming down, and so the powers are changing around the world. So it's a mess. Everybody's fighting. Our world today has got its own messes, right?
Yeah.
And it's almost like he's saying to his people, I'm with you. This stuff is all around you. The world's tottering and there's going to be a change of power, but I'll carry you and rescue you. So it seems very encouraging to me what he's saying to him there, that in the midst of the mess, I'm here for you.
Yeah, I like the way you've put that. Yeah, Cyrus has been showing up in the last few chapters and will most probably, I'll say 95% show up here. I say 95% because there's another way to understand towards the end of our chapter. But the fact that God is bearing, yeah, it's, I was speaking with a Zen Buddhist last night, a Jewish-born Zen Buddhist, and asked him if he knew of a particular Zen Buddhist who's kind of famous in the Jewish world, Bernie Glassman. Perhaps some of you had heard of him. He's no longer a blessed memory. And I knew about him because I was once in a Barnes and Noble someplace on a trip looking for a book that would be small that I could easily put in my bag, my computer bag. So that's how I sometimes choose books. And I found a book that was, about this big, the kind of the size of a paperback book, but hardbound, called Bearing Witness. And it was this kind of Zen Torah that, or Dharma, I should stay in the same world, linguistic world, this Dharma of being active, social justice activity. And part of what he writes in that book is about planning and doing the first meditation retreat in Auschwitz. And I think those things still happen. These multi-faith meditation retreats in Auschwitz to bear witness. And the idea of bearing witness, I hadn't really heard the term. I don't remember when it was. I have to find the book first, but I have to see when it was published. I could look it up when it was published, but it was right when it was new. I had not really heard the term or thought about the term bearing witness. I'm sure it's been around for a while. We use that a lot. And that's what I kind of get back to my trip just now. I did not feel the need to go down to the area of Gaza, but a number of my rabbinic colleagues have felt the need to go down and talk to survivors. So I guess I bear witness in a different way with my family and to go see some of the educational activities that are happening in Tel Aviv for those that have had to leave the areas adjacent to Gaza already and been away from their homes for 2 months now. Somebody had to set up, and it wasn't the government in the beginning. The government is finally stepping in with funding and not so much apparatus, but what do you do with kids that have been out of school for days, then weeks, and bearing witness is something that I learned to do without maybe calling it that when I was working with HIV/AIDS in the 90s, is to just be present. So I remember visiting, some of you have heard this story before, I remember visiting with a rabbinical student from California who had worked with HIV/AIDS in LA, and then she knew that I was doing that in Israel, and this is the 90s. So second half of the 90s, maybe, maybe not, whenever it was, 96, 97. And we came out of this visit. She drove down from Jerusalem. We went into Tel Aviv. There was an AIDS hospice. We drove out and I said, so would you like to talk about it? She says, well, I'm really surprised. In fact, I'm a little disturbed. You didn't say one prayer with any of those people. We'd seen 3 or 4 patients. And I said that prayer isn't appropriate. One of them was Bedouin. Right? One of them One of them was Ethiopian, a different language of the prayer, the kind of prayer that you know from the Protestant kind of, um, but I guess also Protestant Catholic, the Christian norm of American chaplaincy to go in and pray with somebody. And I know it well, although I go to see the Jewish patients in the hospital, still, if I'm called to go in or somebody asks me, if a Catholic family asks me to pray for them, of course I do. And even today, I would even use Jesus. Jesus, that's me today. At one point, I would not have done that, but if I feel that's appropriate, that's what the family needs in a great time of need. But in Israel at that time, that wasn't really part of it. Prayer was not, it was just being there. That's what I'm trying to say. It was being present. And that's my understanding of bearing witness, and then being able to tell, about these people to others as a way to talk about HIV/AIDS with young people or whatever it might be, or as a way to talk about how do we treat people who are at the end of their lives and there's nothing they can do about it. That was the case. And so it must have been actually earlier in the 90s. Okay, so bearing witness, and on one hand, and God bearing the people, bearing the people. Okay, sorry, I went off a little bit on a tangent there. Megan, would you like to go on? Was there anything else in this paragraph? 3, 4?
David, I have a doctor's appointment at 2 o'clock. I'll be leaving in a few minutes. I just want you to know that's why I'm leaving.
Okay, well, may you be healthy.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, go ahead, Megan. 5, 7.
Okay. To whom can you compare me or declare me similar? To whom can you liken me so that we seem comparable? Those who squander gold from the purse and weigh out silver on the balance, they hire a metal worker to make it into a god, to which they bow down and prostrate themselves. They must carry it on their backs and transport it. When they put it down, it stands. It does not budge from its place. If they cry out to it, it does not answer. It cannot save them from their distress.
Comments, reactions?
Uh, It feels like this is returning to a theme that's been in some earlier chapters where the text talks about people respond to spiritual needs by making things. That's come up before, I think.
Making things, yeah. Okay, I have to keep my mouth shut. Was thinking of a particular situation where I do see certain people, that's how they deal with anxiety in their lives. That's how they deal with powerlessness, is to make something. I think that's that's how I understand. That's how I hear you, Dan. And that fits into this argument, which has come up about this making of, but it fits in nicely to this George Adam Smith's comment about, or entitlement. This is bearing or born. They are being, well, born, B-O-R-N. They're being born. They're being created by the ones they're supposed to be. They have no, they don't move any place. They just stand. I once went to an exhibit of Tibetan art, Tibetan religious art. That was a little controversial. It was I think, I know we've talked about this before. I forgot in what context. It was in Santa Ana, because I remember mentioning in Santa Ana, and one of the people from Orange County said, oh yes, whatever that museum is in Santa Ana. I went with my good friend and teacher, Rabbi Eli Spitz. And so we kind of walked around for a few hours in this exhibit as chavruta, as we were a couple, partners studying the text. And we got to the statue that has, I'm totally ignorant of Hindu culture and Buddhist culture. So that same statue that you have that has the multiple arms, do you people know what I'm talking about?
Kali?
Yeah, is it Kali? Whatever. It seems like there's 8 or 9 arms on both sides. And I said to Eli Spitz, I said to Rabbi Spitz, I said, you know what? I don't think this is what the rabbis were thinking of, because we have detailed sections about the laws of idolatry in the Talmud. I don't think they knew about this kind of a statue. He said, why not? I said, because to my mind, and I think that's reflected here, in what we read, the objection to idols, thank you, but that there's just two arms there, right? Richard, can't hear you. Oh.
Yeah, there's two arms on each side.
Right, so this was a statue that had like 8 arms on each side.
Oh.
And so I said, when the rabbis talk about the idols that they knew were like this, posed like we see here, right? They're what does he say? When they put it, it stands, it does not budge from its place. But the whole point of that idol, I think, is to show the motion. That's what I understand from those 8 arms, is that no, this is an idol this is representative of motion, not something that just stands in one place. He disagreed with me, but I still think there's a point. There's a point that, yes, Dan.
I think the idols, get my words straight, that the people who make them know they're representational. And then the people writing this are acting as if they aren't, that they're the real thing. So it's a polemic.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's why Bishop Stendhal, and his 3 rules for interfaith dialogue are, the first one is learn about the other faith from the person that actually practiced that faith and not from a book. Yes, this is a typical ridicule. It's a typical Hebrew biblical ridicule, and afterwards rabbinic ridicule of the world of idol worship, obviously they don't talk about it that way themselves. Any Hindu we used to have Ajit used to be, I don't know if he's still going to be participating, I haven't seen him for a while, but Ajit would be able to tell us a little bit more about these kinds of things from his own background of Baha'i, of taking in from different faiths. But I've spoken to maybe 5 or 6 Hindus in my life in interfaith dialogue. I just haven't been to places where there've been a strong Hindu community, and all of them talk about the one God. Nobody doesn't. I haven't heard any of them talk about various gods no. The various little g gods are different aspects of that one God. We have our own angelic system as well, both in Christianity and Judaism, depending on whether you're a Kabbalist or not. If you're a Kabbalistic Jew, there's a whole world of angels that do all sorts of different things. They're manifestations of the one God, and yet they're not people. There's a bit of idolatry involved, perhaps. It all depends. But yes, absolutely, Dan. This is it's almost unfair ridicule. But it poetically, from a literary point of view, it makes this beautiful point, right? You thought you're being born by those other gods. I'm the one, says Adonai, Elohei Yisrael, Yud-Heh Vav-Heh, the God of Israel. I'm the one who actually made everything. I'm the one who actually can carry everything. And I don't stand on a shelf, and you don't buy gold to make me. Yeah. Anybody else?
It's,
Yes.
there's some interesting explanations and pictures on Google about those deities with multiple arms.
Did any of them say that this is not idolatry?
No, none of them said that, but they do refer to a higher guard.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
anyway.
Rita Claire.
I was just reminded of going to visit a friend who had recently lost her husband, and she had almost looked like an altar to for him. And I don't know, it made me feel a little uncomfortable. Would that be considered a certain form of idol worship? I don't know.
Yeah, I guess it would depend on who you would ask, and a lot of things would go in. By Don, a lot of things would go into this. First of all, is the psychological aspect. Does somebody consumed with the memory of someone, and this is not, I'm not saying this in a judgmental way, but consumed so much that every conversation, every breath for years afterwards leads to the memory of that one particular, that one person, as close as that person was, whether it is in life and conversation, or whether it is a section of the wall that's devoted to different kinds of things. There would be those that would say that's unhealthy. right? There would be those, look, in the Hebrew Bible, it's pretty common opinion, I think, among scholars, certainly late 20th century scholars, that the reason that Moses and Elijah and Enoch, those three characters, biblical characters, have no burial place in the narrative itself. And the reason for that was this tendency to worship the dead, is to make something out of the grave. And we see that not just, but with Hasidic rabbis. We see that with holy rabbis from the North African Jewish community. There's the pilgrimages to the grave. We see that in Ukraine, right, with Rabbi Nachman Mibraslav, even during a war. And so you balance, like, all these kind of things. It's not something that I gravitate towards, but it's very Jewish. Now, look at it's all to varying degrees. If people are from Eastern traditions, Buddhist and or let's go say Asian traditions, there are often offerings of flowers or cigarettes or candy. Perhaps you've seen that in other countries, but even here, I think I've noticed in certain, there's a nail salon in Palm Springs that I think there's an altar right when you go in. I've seen it through the window as I walk by. It's common to many cultures. Is that the kind of idolatry that the Torah is talking about, or is it that I don't know. It really depends. I think look at many Orthodox Jews. For many Orthodox Jews, the Trinity is idolatry, because it's polytheism. It's not one God; it's three gods. I don't think that way. There are some medieval rabbis that didn't think that way, but that kind of became the prevalent thing. So as far as who would consider it, I don't know. If I was the rabbi and somebody was asking my advice, that person themselves, then I would always be worried about, how consuming is this? How overpowering is this in blinding other aspects of life? And then that's a form of idolatry, perhaps. I think many of you have heard me say that I think that mid-century modern architecture in Palm Springs is a form of idolatry as well. When I hear people talk about a building, and I never hear them talk about anything, the unhoused population or the environment or other things, but all I hear them talk about are the buildings, and to me that's something wrong. Or a synagogue that has a building where the people don't matter, but the building is what matters. To me, that's a form of idolatry as well. Okay. Let's go. Rita Claire, why don't you read 8 to 11 for us? Are we at 8? Yeah, yes. 8 to 11.
8 to 11. Keep this in mind and stand firm. Take this to heart, you sinners. Bear in mind what happened of old. For I am God, and there is none else. I am divine, and there is none like me. I foretell the end from the beginning, and from the start, things that had not occurred. I say, my plan shall be fulfilled. I will do all I have purposed. I summoned that swooping bird from the east, from a distant land, the man for my purpose. I have spoken, so I will bring it to pass. I have designed it, so I will complete it.
So, Stephen Byrne, you mentioned beforehand Cyrus. Many people see I summoned the swooping bird from the east, and probably I would guess that's who it is. The swooping bird from the east in Hebrew is Ait. An Ait is Karami Mizrach Ait. Why swooping bird? Maybe because they just understand it poetically. An Ait is a hawk. And I didn't see the commentaries nobody really knows why a hawk would be used to a hawk per se, as opposed to another bird of prey, would be used to symbolize Cyrus. I think, and maybe I saw that his official bird was the eagle or something like that, but I don't think that's the point. The point is that from a Babylonian point of view, the Babylonian hegemony, the Cyrus is coming out from the east, even more east. But I said before, 98% Cyrus, there's 2%, maybe it's more than 2%. Rashi, the medieval rabbinic commentator, says that the reference here is to Abraham.
Hmm.
Abraham comes from, and it's interesting, it actually opened up a whole new way of thinking about this. Abraham comes from the east. Abraham is the one who's going to repopulate and override all the things that came beforehand, the seed of Abraham. It's and it kind of meshes with the spirit of this paragraph, is that I planned everything. This is part of my plan. Back then, when I sent Avram and Sarai from Mesopotamia, from way east to that land, that was my plan. I can only imagine. I have to look through all the Rashi of that particular section. I also have to see what Rashi's sources were, which I didn't, to see how that builds. But that's really interesting. That's an interesting way of thinking. I don't think it's the pshat. I don't think that's the simple meaning of the text, but it's an interesting divergent from what we would assume to be, especially since these last chapters, Cyrus has been, yeah, and not always named by name. Here's an interesting fact about the translation we're using, the New Jewish Publication Society. This is the newer version of it. And this is something you can do as a translator and be clever, but sometimes maybe too clever. I said that the theme of this chapter has been born or bearing or born, or the whole thing of bearing in mind. Look on the third line, it says the whole thing of bearing something, bearing witness, or I talked about bearing witness, but bearing the burden of something. The third line begins with bear in mind, and one might think, oh, that's part of the bearing theme. But if you can see, for those of you that read the Hebrew, Dan and others, the word that it's translating is zichru. It's remember, and only because from a poetic point of view, the translation didn't want to say keep in mind again or remember for whatever reason. I think somebody translated this and decided on this word with a smile. Oh, we're going to stay with the motif, and we'll use we'll use a term, bear in mind, which faithfully translates zichru, to remember, but does it in a word that jives with the rest of the chapter. Anything else?
I just want to add, I'm really taken by that thing you said from Rashi about it possibly referring to Abraham. And that's, to me, it's why it's poetry, because it doesn't have to be specific. And you can put all those meanings into it that you want.
Yeah. Yeah, I heard a good discussion. There's a podcast called Identity Crisis with Yuda Kurtzer, who's one of the co-president CEOs of the Shalom Hartman Institute. And I've never met him personally, but it's a podcast I appreciate. And I haven't heard any podcasts, because I haven't been driving with, that's when I usually hear, because I've been away. And also in the beginning of the war, I really wasn't interested in hearing people talk about, break down the analysis from American point of view. I was more interested in being part of Israeli society via watching TV and speaking with my friends. And so I did hear a conversation between Yuda Kurtzer and Rabbi Josh Kulp, who some of us have met indirectly, because when we've studied Mishnah or part of the Talmud, he has a modern commentary that we've used. It's online in Safari. I don't know if it's published otherwise. Anyway, and he teaches Talmud at the conservative yeshiva. I think he was ordained at JTS, if I remember correctly. And they were arguing or debating over the Hanukkah story and the Chashmonaim and the texts that we have about Hanukkah, which are very little. And what do you understand from the Talmudic text, and what do you understand from other texts? And at one point, Josh Kulp, who has a PhD as well, I think he does, says to Kurtzer, Yuda Kurtzer, who has a PhD, but not, and often says, I'm not a rabbi. He says to him, well, that was a great rabbinic commentary. So he says, but I'm not a rabbi. He says, oh, give me a break. Everything you do is like a rabbi. Everything you talk about. And that's the quintessential thing, Dan, that we've been talking about now in the last few months, about how our texts used and how proof text, where do you go? the topic that the thing that we're talking about is actually quite interesting. It's from the Talmudic section that talks about why we light candles on Hanukkah. It's a very small section. And the next section that comes after that is if somebody hit a hammer on iron and a spark flew out and it caught fire and did this in the public domain, then that person is responsible for. And then it goes on, and if a camel was walking by overburdened and it touched a lantern that was outside and caused a fire, so who's responsible? And so Yuta was saying, and this is, you say, well, isn't that maybe what the rabbis of the Talmud are trying to say? Hanukkah can be something very, very powerful, very, very useful, but sometimes you've got to be careful when the hammer causes a spark to catch fire, and maybe that's anti-militarism in the Talmud. That's what they were debating. Some of you know that in Israel, Hanukkah over the years was far more of a militaristic holiday, and in the diaspora, especially in North America, it was far more of a miracle light holiday, competing with Christmas. In the Middle Ages, until the end of the 19th century, it was absolutely an insignificant holiday that people kept at home, but it was not an important holiday in any way. And it became so for two different reasons in two different places. Part of the ethos of the new Jew, the Jew who could hold a weapon, that started with Zionism in the late 19th century and has led to, I'm not being judgmental here, leads up to what we're going through now, as far as military might is concerned. And on the other hand, the United States wanted to be part of that conversation about miracles and light in the darkest time of the year. And even though the roots of the holiday have to do with light in the darkest time of the year and are not Jewish and not Christian, but okay, I'm rambling. Sorry. Anyway, what I'm trying to say, Dan, is yes, that and the more you learn, I would say, the more one learns, one more studies the text, the more possibilities there are to say. Somebody said to me at Taizé, the brother who was, he turned to me one moment, he said, would you start us off in a prayer? Would you say a few words for Shabbat? We were all together in in a cafeteria for Shabbat. And I said something, I did what I did. So he says, boy, did you prepare that? I said, well, you're around for long enough. There's enough stuff to draw from. So, because the continual reading of text, to me, that's my point. The more people read text and the more they're flexible and fluid with what they allow as interpretations of that text. And I hope that we're doing that here as well. There's sometimes the simple meaning of text, sometimes there's the midrash of the rabbis or of Christianity, and sometimes what do we say right now? And what do we say today in the midst of a war as opposed to a year ago, which were something, or as opposed to the pandemic or whatever it might have been. Okay, so Richard, how about the 12 to 13 for us?
Listen to me, you stubborn of heart, who are far from victory. I am bringing my victory close. It shall not be far, and my triumph shall not be delayed. I will grant triumph in Zion to Israel, in whom I glory.
Right. So who do you think this is talking to?
To the Israelites.
So you might think that because because it said before, listen to me, house of Jacob, but I think it could go either way. First of all, yes, the text is talking to the Israelites because it's a prophetic text written by Israel, and it's not being written to the nations. I think even the prophecies that are aimed at Egypt or aimed at Tyre and in the book of Ezekiel, essentially they're talking to the people themselves, right? That's a literary device being used. But one could also say this is talking to the enemy because it says that those of you who schlepped, whose animals schlepped the idols, those of you who thought that, you were being saved by the things that you were making, perhaps it's the enemy as well. Anyway, I brought something which is a little bit difficult. It's not a terribly polite source from the Talmud, but we had room on the page and wanted to bring one more thing. And so Dan, if you could read from the Babylonian Talmud.
Rav Nachman said, all mockery and obscenity is forbidden, except for mockery of idol worship. which is permitted, as it is written, bell bows down, Nevo stoops. And it is written, they stoop, they bow down together, they could not deliver the burden. Rabbi Yanai said, this principle that one is permitted to mock idol worship is derived from here. The inhabitants of Samaria shall be in dread for the calves of Beit Aven. For its people shall mourn over it, and its priests shall tremble for it, for its glory, because it is departed from it, from Mosiah. Do not read it as its glory, kavodo, but rather read it as its burden, kevedo, meaning it is unable to restrain itself from defecating.
Right. So apropos, we were talking about the the misrepresentation, the misunderstanding, the hatred, or the derision that rabbinic texts have for other religions, and in this case, aimed towards Roman paganism. Well, I guess one would say, or the memory of Roman paganism, because this is being said in Babylonia. Is it aimed at the Babylonian gods? I don't really know that that was the issue so much. But whatever it's aimed towards, it's making an exception. You can be disrespectful when it comes to this, and this worked its way into Orthodox Jewish law, traditional Jewish law, because it was one of the few things that people could do when they were suffering from anti-Semitism, especially in the hands of the church. The way to get back sometimes would be through these kinds of texts. And these kinds of thoughts being, we're allowed to do it. The thing that we wouldn't think of, the things that all of us would think of, and you've got to be respectful despite what the religion is, assuming it's not being destructive to other people. Although that's also something that some people think that circumcision is being destructive, is being cruel to other human beings. So I guess it's, in any case, there was room on the page, so I brought this little tidbit for us to. Comments or questions?
Well, Rabbi, I think there's a fine line between creating idols and looking at art and artisans, and God is invisible except in your heart and in your mind and in your soul. And people search for objects to hold on to that will make them feel closer to something that they believe in. I mean, I walk in somewhere and I see a statue of the Virgin Mary. I really don't think that my friends are worshiping that statue. It's the thought behind it. And I don't know. We have to be tolerant anyway.
Right, and the same for the crucifix as well, obviously.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's absolutely. That's an important point.
It's just something. It's something that visually one can hang on to when they can't find it in their soul to feel that's enough.
I'm thinking just recently was the procession of the Our Lady of Guadalupe,
Yes.
from Palm Springs to Indio. You see in movies and villages in Italy and different places in Mexico there. Yes, I don't, it's funny, I'm attracted to see those things. At Taizé, the crucifix, which is a very complex crucifix, is moved in the evening service from the front of the church to the middle. Once the brothers exit, some of them come back and they continue the prayer, the song. Most people stay in the church, and then and they laid it down at the beginning of Advent, Saturday night, and different people took turns being at the four corners and kneeling in prayer there. So it's very much focused on the object of the cross. I only felt, I mean, I wasn't moved to do that myself, but I certainly had a sense of holy envy of the connection. And yeah, you need something. And look at Jews do the same thing with the Torah scroll. I'm sorry to say this, and many people would disagree with me, but the Torah scroll, you kiss it, you lift it, lifting up to see the text, but people don't realize it's in order to see the text and to have a chance to read, in the same way that the holding of the gospel in the churches that do that kind of mass, holding for people, that is behind it. But instead, people, you see the Sephardic or the Mizrahi custom is to lift your pinky up, and there's a little bit too much going on there, which is not the intellectual side that I would be looking for. So people do it all the time. If the Torah scroll falls and you fast or people fast for 30 days, this, again, that's the personification of a scroll. The way people, I'm all for having things, sacred objects. I understand that, but sometimes it goes overboard, and it can go overboard. I'm looking, at the stuff we have here. I don't think that Sasha and I relate to any of the things we have. I mean, I've got candlesticks from my Bobby, so they're emotionally important for me, but I don't assign them any theological value, I don't think. And I've got a smiling Buddha right above Bobby's candlestick, so I got my bases covered. Okay. All right. Anything else, folks? Well, may this Advent period be one full of light. May the light continue to build towards Christmas in your own, if that is your practice. And may the light that we light tonight not die away so quickly that it leave its residue on the days to come. And I think I'll be together with Stephen next week for the class. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.